Action. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our intimacy training part 3. We have an enormous live audience of 2, including David and Jill, and nobody else yet. So I hope we get some folks to join us. We've had 3 broadcasts on kind of flirting and hustling. I did those with Angela Crum and Kyle Jones. And this will be our 3rd broadcast on intimacy training with Dr. Jill Levitt, who has just returned from a wonderful 2-week vacation in Italy with her family. So welcome back, Jill.
Thank you, David.
And we were saying some things before we started that you said were wonderful that I was supposed to say, but now I can't remember what they were. Maybe you can summarize a little bit of that.
Yeah, I guess, David, we were talking just to share with the audience about kind of our goal for today. We have received a number of emails from people who've watched our broadcast asking questions about how to develop closer relationships with people, how to respond to criticism, how to deal with their own negative thoughts and feelings. So that's what our goal is today, is to respond to some of those questions, to invite the audience to ask specific questions, which we can address later in the broadcast. And I think, David, you were just talking about how challenging it is for people to actually develop, loving and connected relationships.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's much easier to treat, in my experience, depression and anxiety. I see rapid recovery in not all, but nearly all patients who are depressed and anxious. But when people are having trouble with relationship problems, it can be very difficult and very painful, particularly because you have 2 enemies when you're in conflict with a loved one or a friend or a colleague. One is the actual criticism that you're receiving from the other person, but the other enemy is the enemy inside of your own head, the internal dialogue, the things that you're saying to yourself that get you upset and get you into kind of a defensive posture. And that's part of the reason why I think developing loving relationships can be so incredibly challenging, even among those who are motivated and good-hearted and want to use the 5 secrets of effective communication. Still can be hard. And then when you look at the world and world politics and people who aren't even motivated so much to have loving relationships with people who kind of more motivated to want to have enemies and to put people down and to resolve conflicts through hostility and power and violence, the prognosis becomes very, very difficult. And I was saying to you earlier, Jill, like maybe I shouldn't say this in public, but my wife, who's really definitely the brains in our family, she's just brilliant. We were just saying even last night that she thinks the prognosis for the human race is not good, that we will, wipe ourselves out through war, through global warming, through this dark side of human nature. And the sad thing is we'll probably take a lot of innocent animal species with us at the same time. But we're in there.
If we haven't motivated everyone to with our pessimism. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, we're here fighting for all of us.
Yeah. And one thing I was going to say, David, that what you just said reminded me of that I think might be helpful to share with the audience is that one of the things people struggle with in terms of intimate relationships and dealing with criticism is that either you think in your own mind, this person is wrong, and you argue back, which we see a lot of the time, right? So you're insisting the other person is wrong. This is just not true about me. You're wrong. And so I'm going to defend myself. Or the opposite is sometimes the case. And we have a question today that deals with this, which is that you just think you're right. I really suck. You're right. I am a terrible parent, or I'm always late, or you just agree emphatically with the criticism, but it sort of hurts your ego so much that it's painful. And, that doesn't actually bring intimacy and closeness in a relationship, right? When you just go, oh, woe is me, you're right, I'm really awful. And also it leads to kind of a secondary individual problem, which is sort of feelings of depression or anxiety or things like that.
That's true. And also, sometimes people, perhaps unknown to their conscious awareness, and we want to say hello to some of the wonderful people who just joined us. Lisa Kelly. Hi, Lisa. Ralph Henley, Julie Simmons, Kathy Leffler, Ron Fox. Bernie is back. Hey, Bernie. Good to see you again. And Yehuda, number one on our list of visitors. Good to see you from Mexico. And we can lower the price on the supplies for your colleagues there to practically zero if you want, Yehuda, if we just get them to sign something that says they won't distribute them online. Because I'm victim of tremendous online piracy, but would be thrilled to make these tools available to all of your students and colleagues down there in Mexico. And I learned from Yehuda that a lot of them are treating people in impoverished areas for as little as $10 an hour. And people even in the wealthy areas for $50 an hour. And we sometimes don't think about the enormous financial discrepancies between our way of life here in America and much of the the rest of the world. Well, we've got a great question here from Cheryl France on exactly what you're saying, Jill. And thank you for this one. Cheryl is saying, hi, David, I'm very familiar with your work, since from a personal and professional perspective. Thank you. You have a wonderful positive impact on millions of people's lives, mine included. I'm now a religious follower of your podcast once I found them earlier this year. And if any of you aren't listening to the Feeling Good podcast, they're free of charge. You can sign up for them on my website, feelinggood.com. My host, Fabrice Nye, and I have done 100 podcasts now, and it's on the new Team Therapy. They're designed for learning, for therapists, as well as to accelerate the treatment of your patients. You can find them on iTunes, a lot of outlets. And we had our third month of hitting more than 50,000 downloads.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's exciting. Now, Kathy or Cheryl has a question. And she said, I'd be delighted if you answered at some point on one of your Ask David podcasts. Well, it's not that. It's the David and Jill Show. I hope this is just as good for you, Cheryl. One of the biggest roadblocks I personally find with agreeing with someone who criticizes me, which seems to be very easy for me, is that when I agree with them, I immediately feel bad, and all the negative thoughts flood forth. I end up taking on whatever they say. Like if my hubby says, Cheryl, you never listen to me, I say, you're right, I never listen. Then my negative thoughts go something like this. I tell myself, I never listen. I should listen more. What is the matter with me that I don't listen more? I'm a bad person because I don't listen. Writing them down and challenging them works, but when I'm in a conversation, I would rather not shift the focus in the moment, even though I think I do. What strategies do you suggest to avoid going into that dark hole and staying in the interaction and working it through? Great, fantastic question. And let me just say, to build on what you said earlier, Jill, is that sometimes the self-criticism that you do when someone else criticizes you can actually be, and I don't mean to say this is always going, but it could be viewed as a kind of manipulation. A woman came to me with moderate to severe depression, and then she said the real problem was that she and her husband were like roommates. They got along well, but they never talked about feelings. They didn't deepen the relationship. And so I thought, well, maybe couples therapy would be a good thing. I could give them kind of couples therapy 101, and you talk and you paraphrase, and now you talk and you paraphrase, kind of teach them how to communicate and open up more. But I noticed that, she said, well, my husband will never share his feelings. But whenever he would say anything that was critical of her, she would respond by saying, I know I'm a worthless human being. I know I'm a bad wife. I think I'm going to commit suicide. And this had a stunning effect on him and shut him down. And So the team interpersonal model is we create our own interpersonal reality at every moment of every day, and you can see that plainly there. She complained that her husband wouldn't express his feelings, but every time he tried to do that, she threatened suicide, which is, I can't imagine a more stunning way to silence someone, and yet she seemed unaware of that. And I decided that she couldn't tolerate intimacy, because intimacy means the capacity of two people to share negative feelings and still hang in there as friends, as colleagues. And I've had experiences with how hard that can be, even this week. And it's hard, but that's what real friendship, that's what real intimacy is. And I treated her individually for 10 sessions with what we then called cognitive therapy, and got her out of her depression. And then we reinvited the husband back in, and then they did very well in their couples work. But she had to change that inner dialogue that you write about so well here in your question for us, Dr. Cheryl. And so...
Yeah. And David, I was going to say, I think you're bringing up two things. One is that it could be, it is obviously in part because the person is feeling kind of insecure and anxious and uncomfortable within themselves. And so it's very hard to be criticized. But also on an interpersonal level, people need to notice that if you are doing that, or if your patient is doing that, it is also kind of a strategy to control the other person, whether it's intentional or unintentional. In other words, if someone criticizes you and you over the top, we love disarming, which is finding truth, but being really authentic. But if it becomes, you're right, I'm just an awful person and I'm just so terrible and I always make mistakes, and you become so inwardly focused, right? Then it really is hurtful to the other person. If I were to share my feelings with someone and they were just to sort of shut down and become so upset and overwhelmed, I would then feel that it was my role to take care of them in that moment, my role to help them to feel better, which in the end I'd feel really annoyed about, right? Because I'd feel that I didn't get my needs taken care of. I won't feel good about that interaction. I won't feel closer to you. I'll feel instead like, well, that was a waste of time, because now instead I'm burdened with having to actually take care of you, right?
Yeah. And if you're afraid that the other person's going to be angry at you and you're saying, I'm no good, reacting like that forces them to become angry with you. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But I guess we could talk though about the good news is that there are actually strategies to help someone if they were to be feeling so down on themselves or so hard on themselves.
Yeah, and we can illustrate the solution for you, Cheryl, you who are not even listening. Thinking this is going to be a podcast.
So she can
it's
watch
a broadcast, not a podcast. But one is the internal solution, and we can model externalization of voices, how to talk back to some of these negative thoughts. But then we could also, if you like, model the external solution through feared fantasy.
Okay.
Having a husband who is saying you never listen, or just through 5 secrets, we can model the internal and the external solution. But the reason I was thinking feared fantasy would be good for Cheryl too it would be kind of an exposure activity, so she's not so uptight when it's happening in real time.
So actually there are 3, then I'll reiterate for the audience. So there's 3 directions you could go in. One would be kind of a cognitive therapy direction. We'll show you how to do externalization of voices, how to talk back to these negative thoughts and change your cognition. The other would be like an exposure direction, where we'd actually have you confront this fear that you really are, never listen, and kind of the husband becomes the attacker, and we could kind of show you how to work with a patient using I would call it like a role-playing exposure strategy called feared fantasy. And then the third would be using what we call the relationship journal to actually help the person to use the 5 secrets and just learn to kind of warmly and empathically connect with someone when they're being critical.
Absolutely. So that let's dive in. Now, in an actual therapy session, we wouldn't dive in the way we're doing right now. We would first empathize with Cheryl. That might take 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Then we do paradoxical agenda setting, where we showed what all of her negative thoughts about herself showed about her that's beautiful and awesome, and what some advantages are. And then see if she'd want to tone down some of her negative feelings rather than making them disappear entirely. And then we would go into cognitive techniques like identify the distortions, externalization of voices, paradoxical double standard, downward arrow technique, examine the evidence, on and on and on. But let's go right into, well, first of all, let's just warm up our audience. Let's say Cheryl has the negative thoughts. He's right, I never listen. And we might, if that's the first thought that Cheryl wanted to work on, and if she's motivated to challenge this thought, we might say, what are some of the distortions in that thought? Maybe some of our audience who know the 10 cognitive distortions, what are the distortions in that thought, I never listen? If you're telling yourself that, you believe that 100%. Hello.
So if you're with us, type it in your chat box, right? What are the distortions you see in that thought? I never listen.
So if nobody types anything in, I'm going to conclude that none of you are listening to the thought we're working on. Very good. Oh, I wonder if is my head jumping around?
Yeah, I just saw you
jumping around.
I just saw you freeze a little bit, David.
I'm going to reload here.
Okay, so I'll read some of what we're seeing from the audience.
Yeah.
So Ron Fox. Listen, right?
Right.
Lisa Kelly said all or nothing overgeneralization.
Right.
Discounting the positives.
Mm-hmm. Right. How about self-blame?
Self-blame, definitely.
A hidden should statement?
Absolutely. I should always listen, right?
Right. What else is
We have Liz Richard said all or nothing thinking, all or nothing, discounting the positives, overgeneralization.
Is Liz Richard? Oh, Liz is here. Yes, we've been talking about you, Liz, and how the Institute has to lower their standards a little bit.
David's doing a private joke with Liz, just so everyone else knows what's going on here. Someone else said, and Julie Simmons wrote a hidden should statement, right? Which is what David just said. Absolutely. Maybe emotional reasoning. It feels like it's true, therefore it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, Liz, I didn't mean to tease you there, but I was hearing some wonderful things about you just before the broadcast, for whatever that's worth. So, yeah, we had a 10 plus or 11 mile hike or something like that today. So if I seem like I seem like I've had a stroke or something, I hope
not. You've got me who's jet lagged and David who's fatigued. We're a great dynamic duo. So let's keep going, David. So people identified the distortions, and then what would we do next?
Well, now externalization of voices is a very flashy way, and you would say to the patient, now I'm going to play the negative part of your mind, Cheryl, and you play the positive part of your mind. So what is your name, Cheryl?
So I'm going to be the positive Cheryl. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm going to be the negative Cheryl. So you have to establish that you and the patient both have the same name. And now, Cheryl, I'm going to read to you your negative thoughts in the second person you, and I want you to respond in the first person I. And when you respond, you can try to defeat me through arguing. That's kind of the self-defense paradigm, or through the acceptance paradox. That's where you defeat me by finding truth in what I'm saying with a sense of humor, a sense of inner peace, and sometimes a combination of the two wins the day. So could I speak to you for a minute, Cheryl?
Sure. So I'm going to role play Cheryl, the patient, in this example. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm the negative Cheryl, and I just want to remind you, Cheryl, that you never listen.
Well, it's true that I like to talk a lot and hear myself talk, and I do sometimes struggle to stop and really listen, especially to my husband, and kind of take his perspective. And he does tell me that a lot of the time. But it's certainly not accurate that I never listen. My husband and I do have a really warm and caring relationship. And while I could definitely do a better job of listening more of the time, I think I do a decent job enough of the time that he's stuck around all this time and still really cares about me.
Great. Now, who won?
I'll say me.
Big or small?
I think it was a big win.
Big or huge?
I think it was a huge win.
Yeah, I think it was huge. Now, if it wasn't huge, you do role reversals back and forth until both you and the patient had won huge. But since you, the positive Cheryl, won huge on this one, I'll just jump right into another negative thought, because once the person defeats the first negative thought, not always, but almost always, they can blow them all apart. And so it only takes you a minute or two to finish off, 6 or 8 more negative thoughts at that point.
And maybe I'll demonstrate like a not so great win, and then we can do a role reversal, something like that.
Yeah, we could, or you can just keep blowing them out of the water if you like. Yeah, well, you beat me on that first negative thought, positive Cheryl, but the negative Cheryl, am going to tell you that you really should listen more.
I should listen more. You got that right. I agree. That's kind of the point. I would like to be, kind of an even better version of myself for my husband, and that would involve doing a better job of listening more.
Great.
True.
Who won?
So I won that one through just pure kind of self-acceptance. Yeah,
absolutely. And I thought that was a huge win, but I'm going to keep ripping into you.
Okay.
Until all the negative thoughts are gone. But there must be something the matter with you that you don't listen more.
Well, let's see. I'm trying to demonstrate like a mediocre response here, but I don't know. I like I said, I would like to do a better job of listening. I don't think there's anything, horribly characterologically wrong with me, but it is something I need to work on.
Was that big or small?
It was kind of small.
Do a role reversal.
Okay. So, I'll be negative Cheryl and you're going to be positive Cheryl, right?
Yeah.
So Cheryl, what's wrong with you? Something is the matter with you that you don't do a better job of listening.
Yeah. By the way, I would prefer that to be not in a question, because you can't defeat a question.
Yeah. Something's the matter with you that you don't do a good job of listening, right? There's something wrong with you.
Well, there's probably a lot more wrong with me than you're familiar with. My problems listening is just the tip of the iceberg. But absolutely, that when I'm criticized, I sometimes feel profoundly hurt and inadequate. It's very painful for me, and then I sometimes get defensive, and that frustrates my husband, and that's definitely a flaw, and definitely something I want to work on, see if I can learn and grow and improve in that area. But for now, I'm just going to plead guilty as accused on that one.
And so who won that, you or me?
Well, since you're pretending to be the patient, I'll have to ask you.
Oh, okay. So, right. I'm still Cheryl, the patient. So you're supposed to ask me who won that, right?
Yeah. So who won? Yeah.
No, I thought that was great. That was helpful. Again, it was kind of like just a self-acceptance, but you didn't, you didn't really engage with like something's terribly wrong with you, but you were just kind of like, yeah, I've got lots of things I could work on. This is kind of only one of them, but yeah, right.
Yeah. Now, if in fact we could even address that, but there's something terribly wrong with you. Hit me with that one.
Okay, but Cheryl, there is something terribly wrong with you because you don't listen more.
Oh, there's a lot that's terribly wrong with me, I'm sure. What are you referring to specifically?
Oh, the fact that you're such a bad listener.
Well, yeah, that is a terrible flaw. I agree with you there.
Yeah.
Who won?
Yeah, so that was good. And again, the humor, humility, right? Just not taking it so seriously, but agreeing with it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, I'm going to be the negative Cheryl again. We'll just do one more.
Okay.
And then we'll go into the 2 other scenarios that you so wisely suggested. Well, the last thing I want to tell you, Cheryl, is that you're a bad person because you don't listen more skillfully.
Yeah, no, that does not make any sense to me. I mean, my definition of a bad person is not someone who sometimes doesn't listen skillfully. It hurts when my husband tells me that I'm a bad listener, and I kind of feel that for a little bit, like, oh, I'm so bad. But, That just doesn't make sense to me, that a bad person is someone who sometimes doesn't do a good job of listening.
Yeah, and I thought that was huge. And as an aside, I've been working really hard on my new book, Feeling Great, and there's many new themes in this book, but and I'm having a lot of fun writing it. But one of the keys that I'm noticing an awful lot, and it's kind of hard even for therapists to learn, is that overgeneralization, I'm saying more and more, is like one of the hugest keys to all depression and anxiety, and also conflict with others, to be honest. But you see, you're going from I'm having trouble listening skillfully to I'm a bad listener. Now that's a semantic error, labeling it with a moral label. And then you're jumping from, and then if I'm a bad listener, I'm a bad human, a bad self.
Right.
And most of human suffering, perhaps all, if we were to believe the Buddha, it results from this overgeneralization. We go from the specifics to the clouds of abstraction. I'm this bad human being, and that's where most of the intense pain comes from. And
yeah, and David, we talk about that a lot. David and I, in this Tuesday group that we run at Stanford, right? When therapists are new to the model, it can be very challenging and frustrating to learn. And so, while it would be perfectly fine to think, I don't know the 5 secrets very well, or I'm not doing a very good job in this role play, when people then overgeneralize or label themselves as like a bad therapist, or inferior, or a waste of time, or things like that, is when people then get kind of stuck in their heads and feel badly about themselves, and that interferes in their ability to just kind of be open to new learning, right?
Yeah, and it also puts
so this
pressure
idea of
on us.
Overgeneralization is very important.
It puts a little pressure sometimes on us as teachers, because you're naturally very warm. I'm not naturally that warm, but I can remind myself, if I can remember, that when you're going to give a criticism of an error that a student made, to try to do it with a lot of stroking and warmth and respect, because the students are very quick to go to, because I was criticized on how I learned this new technique, an error I made. Therefore, I'm a bad therapist, and everyone's going to judge me. Everyone's going to hate me. And that line of thinking is very powerful, and it's exactly what Cheryl is talking about here in your brilliant email. Should we just jump to the 5 secrets? How we would respond? We could maybe skip the feared fantasy thing.
Sure.
I'm thinking. But let's now say how we would use, the disarming technique, thought and feeling, empathy, inquiry, I feel statements, and stroking, in no particular order, to interact with husband. Now, do you want to be husband, or do you want to
we can start that way. I'm happy to do that. I'll essentially, I'm just gonna say, Cheryl, you never listen to me. You're always so busy kind of talking, and you're not listening to me.
Okay, and then I'll be Cheryl now?
Right.
Oh, okay, yep. Well, then I would say it's painful for me to hear what you're saying, sweetheart, because, I love you, and sadly I have to agree with you. I think I do talk a lot sometimes. I get defensive. I talk over you, and I don't do a good job of listening. And when I think about it, I feel kind of sad and kind of ashamed, because I love you so much, and I'm afraid that when I do that, it keeps us kind of at odds with each other. And I wouldn't be surprised if you sometimes get angry with me and feel hurt and rejected and lonely. Can you tell me more about that? Maybe tell me a time or two, maybe just a few minutes ago, I wasn't doing a good job of listening, and also tell me how you feel when that happens. I really want to hear what you have to say. It's incredibly important.
That was
so
great. I thought that was beautiful. Should I point out to the audience maybe like what the 5 secrets were? I tried to write quickly. Yeah. So no, I thought that was really beautiful. So you said you said you're right. You know, it's true that I sometimes don't do a great job of listening. So that was disarming right off the bat, you know, finding truth in the criticism. And then you said it's painful because I really love you. So that was kind of right away also some I feel statements. It's painful for me to hear that. And also you shared some stroking because I really love you. And again, you did some more disarming. I have to really agree with you. I don't always do a good job of listening. And I feel badly about that because I love you so much. So again, more stroking. And then you did some feeling empathy. So that's kind of empathizing with how he might be feeling. You said, I wonder when I don't listen to you, if you get angry and if you feel hurt and rejected by me, which was really beautiful, feeling empathy, wondering how he might be feeling, and not just angry, but also kind of hurt, rejected, not listened to.
Lonely.
And then you what'd you say? Oh, lonely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I might not have written that down. And then you ended with some inquiry. You know, tell me more about this. Tell me how it makes you feel, and have there been lots of times that I've done this? I really, you know, care about you and want to hear this is important. So it was really nice kind of open-ended inquiry to invite me, the angry husband, to, you know, share more of my feelings with you.
Right. Now, one of the philosophical underpinnings of this is called the disarming technique. And the disarming technique means if you defend yourself with a criticism that seems untrue and unfair, the moment you defend yourself, you'll prove that the criticism is correct. And that's a paradox. And most people defend themselves most of the time, and that's why battles escalate. The other side of the paradox is when you genuinely agree with the criticism that seems untrue and unfair, you'll put the lie to it. In other words, the person will instantly stop believing it. And you notice here that I genuinely agreed with the criticism that I was a poor listener. What will my husband conclude as a result of my statement?
That you're, you know, really a good listener. In that moment, I feel really listened to and heard and understood.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I love about the 5 secrets and the disarming technique. It does present us with a kind of a spiritual paradox. Maybe I shouldn't elevate it to the level of spiritual, but I think it's more than a psychological phenomenon. It's telling us something at a pretty deep level, and there's a brilliant and specific way of stating exactly what that is, and Jill will now state
No, I think you did a great job.
Okay.
I don't have any, no cherry to add to that. That's right. It is.
Yeah. The goal is not to manipulate another person with a series of gimmicks, but to come from the heart and to connect with someone else at a deep level. But it involves the death of your ego, because when you agree that you failed somebody that you love, you have. And it just can be so painful to have to admit that, and
and at the same time, we know this from practice and from our own experience. As soon as you are able to admit that, you know, when your ego kind of steps aside and you just in the moment want to connect with the other person, even if it means being willing to acknowledge your flaws and shortcomings, it feels really beautiful. You know, you don't have to feel defensive and protective. You can instead kind of go, yeah, man, that's totally true. And I do that all the time and I don't mean to, and I care about you. And then you can feel so kind of warm and connected while accepting criticism, you know?
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. And Buddha talked about the great death, and this is one of the 4 great deaths that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But this is also the great rebirth that you're talking about, because the moment you die, you go to heaven. And the other person will die and go to heaven with you in most instances. And that sounds like kind of spiritual psychobabble, but it's practical reality, right? So anyway.
Absolutely. David, I was also going to say something that I saw in Cheryl's email is that she said to us, writing these thoughts down and challenging them works. Like, she recognizes that works, but when I'm in a conversation with someone, I would rather not shift the focus in the moment, meaning she's not going to be like, wait a minute, honey, let me challenge my negative thoughts and then I'll get back to you, right? So I do think, I just thought maybe we could mention too, it sounds like she's saying, I thought maybe it would be useful to mention the feared fantasy or some sort of exposure, because it sounds like what she's saying is outside the context of the moment when she's being attacked, she can sort of think rationally and she can do this work. But in the moment when when her husband is criticizing her, she probably gets actually incredibly kind of anxious and defensive, and then goes to her, all of her negative thoughts.
Well, that's great, and I'm glad you brought us back to this. That's why I like working with you, because 1 + 1 = 3, and you keep us on track. And so we can do a feared fantasy, but in addition, while you were speaking, I thought of another thing, is that you can also deal with that with I feel statements.
Yeah.
To say to the husband when it comes up, now listen, I'm going to try really hard to respond to you, but right now I want you to know I'm hurting a lot, because I'm feeling defensive and angry and threatened and kind of inadequate and worthless, and I just wanted to tell you that I'm doing that to myself because of my thoughts, but that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, and it's making it hard for me to respond in the best way, right? To be able to respond in the way that I want to.
Yeah. Absolutely. So
and the truth is that I think, especially with a spouse, not like maybe a work situation, but I think it's also very reasonable to say, to like maybe just disarm and then say, at the same time, I need a minute to kind of work on this so that I can come back to you and say something that I'm going to feel good about.
Yeah. Now, if we were going to do the feared fantasy, what we would do is say, let's imagine that you were going to go into an Alice in Wonderland nightmare world and interact with the husband from hell.
Right.
And this is what you think your husband is thinking about you, but maybe wouldn't say. And what are those critical, judgmental thoughts that you're afraid that he would have?
Yeah. And so maybe she would say, like, you're a terrible wife because you don't listen.
Yep. Okay, that's a good one. I feel unloved.
That he would say, I feel unloved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What about you're a terrible person because you don't listen?
Yeah. There's a good one. I'm going to tell everyone about you.
Right. I'm going to tell everyone what a bad listener you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
So for the audience, what David and I are doing is we're trying to imagine if you have a patient who's saying, I want a better relationship with my husband. I want to be able to use all these 5 secrets. They're beautiful. I love them. And at the same time, when my husband says something critical, I freeze. I feel totally overwhelmed, and I feel anxious and insecure. And therefore I feel unable to use the 5 secrets skillfully, right? I know them. I want to use them. And outside the moment, I even can feel less self-critical, but in the moment I get really kind of triggered in a way. And so then what we're saying is that we can actually help our patient by practicing, like, what would be the worst case scenario? What would be if your husband could just, kind of rip into you and tell you what an awful, awful wife you are because you don't listen. And we could make it as bad as it would be. And then you could confront that in the office. We consider that exposure, kind of like an interpersonal exposure. And then if we could help you to feel comfortable in that circumstance, then you'd likely feel pretty okay when your husband says something, 10 degrees less challenging.
So we'll do the feared fantasy right now, but then, my mind gets flooded with tons of techniques we could use. We could also, like we saw once in group, with someone suddenly in the exact same position, suddenly had a memory of her father's angry face, shouting at her when she was a little girl. And then we could do memory scripting, kind of hypnosis, bring her into the past, have her talk to that father in ways that she couldn't when she was a little girl. And, that's another form of
right. So many different methods that we could use. And again, what we're saying here is that even with a knowledge and an interest in using the 5 secrets, some people do get kind of really triggered in interpersonal situations, and then it would be worthwhile to work with them on that trigger and on kind of feeling more comfortable being criticized or attacked.
Yeah, but let's do the feared fantasy. Now, remember, this is what she imagines the husband from hell would be thinking about her. And in this Alice in Wonderland world, not only does the husband from hell think these awful things about you, he says them. And so you're going to meet the monster you fear the most to find out if the monster has no teeth. How about I'll be the husband from hell?
Okay.
Lisa says that's a good role for me. That
So
I can
I
sometimes be intimidating to folks. And
so
so,
in this role play, then I'm Cheryl, I'm the patient, right?
yeah,
And you're the husband from
right.
hell. But I'm also
Yeah,
going to I'll try to skillfully respond in a way that kind of shows that I can handle this, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
So we'll see who looks ridiculous here, the
Yeah.
wife or the husband from hell. Well, sweetheart, I just, Cheryl, my beloved wife, I just wanted to tell you that you're a terrible wife because you never listen to me. And what I have to say is extremely important because I'm extremely important. How's that?
Good. Yeah. Ouch. You are a really wonderful and important person. You're really, really important to me, actually. And what you have to say is really important. And you're right. I sometimes don't do a great job of listening to you and sometimes even miss all of the really important things that you have to say.
So who won?
I think I did.
Big or small?
Big.
Big or huge?
Huge.
Huge or gargantuan?
I don't know. Could I have done better? You gotta lay
great.
it on thicker.
No,
I
thought it was gargantuan.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you do a role reversal to make sure that she can do it, but we'll just stick with the current roles.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but anyway, I think you're not only a terrible wife, but a terrible person, and I judge you. I judge you real bad.
Well, that's kind of painful because I really love you, but maybe you have a point. I don't know. It never occurred to me that not being a good listener would be equivalent to being a bad person. But maybe you could explain that to me. What's your reasoning there? Why I plead guilty as charged to being a kind of lousy listener sometimes. But how does that make me a bad person? Explain that to me.
Well, it makes you a bad person because I judge you. And I'm going to tell everyone about what a poor listener my wife is. And they're going to judge you too, because they know how important my words are.
Right. Well, that would bum me out if the whole world was judging me for my poor listening skills. Is there like a club of husbands who get together and complain about like their wives being bad listeners?
Okay. Enough.
Yeah. So the point being that it would likely be challenging. I mean, I tried to do a good job of responding in the feared fantasy, which usually involves sort of humor and humility. And if your patient got stuck, I was being like, I think a pretty kick-ass patient. But if your patient got stuck, then you would offer a role reversal. And the point is that you would keep trying to sort of guide your patient toward sort of disarming and inquiry and essentially like poking holes in a kindly way at this idea that they're so awful and terrible. Is that how you'd say it, David?
Absolutely. Absolutely. By the way, Ron Fonk says, my son Steve said he wants to learn how to do the 5 secrets with friends. I don't know how old he is, but I taught my daughter Senia when she was a freshman in high school. And it just totally revolutionized her social life. She had secret skills, like karate type skills that the other kids didn't have. And it was wildly effective. Rob Wiley says it's very interesting. The power of the techniques is very tangible. But as soon as I imagine a scenario to use it, if I'm not heartfelt or feel I can't be in using them, they immediately feel like they'll fall apart. And that's true. Yeah.
I mean, the answer to that is, again, what we call agenda setting, right? I mean, if it is your goal to authentically connect with another person, to see the world through their eyes, then you probably won't struggle with it. But if you are still harboring this feeling like I'm right and you're wrong, or you can go screw yourself, then you won't be able to use the techniques with authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Well, let's go on to Rajesh's question here so we can kind of keep on track. How can people prone to anxiety overcome their fear of confrontation? Well, similar to the problem we were just working on, actually.
Yeah.
You have to write down your negative thoughts and talk back to those thoughts on a daily mood log. Do your inner dialogue before you can use the outer dialogue. I think such people have trouble expressing even healthy anger, which in turn contributes to their anxiety more. Sure, because if you're harboring a lot of anger and you think you're not allowed to express it and you have to keep it hidden, that actually may be the main cause of your anxiety. That's called the hidden emotion technique. Is this because of the faulty belief that others are more powerful and can cause harm to us? And I think the answer to that is yes. And then, or do we think they can't hold a legitimate confrontation too long because the anxiety will creep in and make it hard for you to stand your ground? Well, there's a lot of truth to that. Or is it because you genuinely believe that you're inadequate, because of your anxiety? And there's a lot of truth to that too. And Jill will now explain in 25 words or less the permanent irreversible cure. What do we do?
What this question reminds me of is this idea that the way that team CBT model works, that I think is, just incredibly effective, is something that we call specificity. And so it's hard sometimes to answer a general question like this. Like, if I have a patient who has a fear of confrontation, is it because of this or this or this? My answer is, I don't actually know. It will totally depend on your patient, right? A patient could have a fear of confrontation because they have kind of traumatic memories of a parent who was always confrontational with them. They could have a fear of confrontation because, whenever they get into confrontations, they're nasty and argumentative and nothing good ever happens. So my answer is, I can't answer the question kind of generally, but I do think there are a number of things raised in this question that we can speak to. So David, one of the things he said was, can people prone to anxiety overcome their fear of confrontation? If they have trouble expressing healthy anger, this will contribute to their anxiety even more. And so I think something we have to offer there, David, is this idea that if you are feeling angry with someone, and we talked about this kind of a few weeks ago, that actually sharing your feelings with the other person using I feel statements is key, right? So the goal is not to act angry with someone when you feel angry, but to share your feelings of anger or frustration kind of openly and warmly, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes we say things like this and you hear them and you don't really grasp them. They kind of go in one ear and out the other, but there's so much amazing wisdom in what you're saying. And sometimes then we get into assertiveness training and you think you're supposed to be real aggressive, go from submissive and inadequate to aggressive and demanding. And that doesn't work either. And people get into this, what I call the dumbbell or the egg. A dumbbell is like a weight with, two weights on each end, and part of it is the I'm no good. That's the submissive side, and then the other is you're no good. That's the demanding side. And people go back and forth between these two, and both of them are doomed to failure. And then the 5 secrets is like an egg that's hovering above either of these, that where you share your feelings in a respectful way, you acknowledge the other person's feelings, and you convey warmth and respect. And that takes a lot of determination and practice. Someone here was saying how I spent 6 months on the train practicing every day just to learn how to use the disarming technique, because I really, really, really wanted to learn how to use it. And it's still sometimes kind of hard for me if a person is saying something that just seems so threatening to my self-esteem. It's really hard, sometimes to agree with criticisms, even when there is a wealth of truth in it. And so this is almost like a religion or a way of life or something to learn the 5 secrets. They're not just some gimmicks you can learn in 5 minutes. They require a lot of practice. If listeners are interested, you should pick up my book, Feeling Good Together. It's a paperback. You can get it on Amazon, and there's written exercises while you read that book. Now, that book alone won't be enough, but it will certainly advance your understanding quite a bit. It'll be several steps on the journey, so to speak.
It reminds me too, David, that one more comment about the email. But I was also going to say, thinking about practicing the 5 secrets, I think it's important for people to think of them, though, kind of like as a as a way of life, like how people say, don't think you're on a diet, but it's like a lifestyle change, right?
Yeah.
So this is not like a tool set that I only take out like from time to time. It's a way of being in the world. And I have a funny example of this, which was that recently I parked my car in a parking lot and someone came over as I was getting out of the car and said, you know, you didn't park your car straight. And this is a very small parking lot and you're taking up 2 spots. And, you know, I looked at my car and I said, oh my gosh, you're right. I'm so sorry. Let me repark my car. And I thought the guy was going to hug me because I was probably the only person who responded kindly to him that day, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, so I basically said, oh my goodness, you're so right. Let me fix it. And he was like, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry to bother you. You know, it was like clearly he expected to be attacked. And so the idea is that disarming is like the way you talk to the person who's pumping your gas, you know, the way you interact with the person at the grocery store, not just kind of a method you have to pull out when you feel like you're being attacked.
And it's a religious concept. The Jewish definition of a spiritual person is someone who treats others with respect,
Yeah.
the environment with respect, treats the world with a sense of respect and awe. That's kind of what we're talking about. Now, Adara has a great question. I'm interested in techniques in handing out criticism. Well, we did that last week or 2 weeks.
The last time that you and I worked together, right?
Yeah,
sharing I feel statements was kind of really key.
And then is there anything you can do about someone who really doesn't want to communicate? And there's a chapter on this in my book, Feeling Good Together, how to talk to someone who refuses to talk with you. And I'll demonstrate the technique and the solution, but let me say, you might not get it because this is going to be too quick, I think. But the psychiatric residents at Stanford sometimes have asked me to supervise them in the treatment. Did I say this already? Or treatment of kids at the Packard Hospital, the inpatient unit, because they often have kids, teenagers who won't talk to them. Often they are being treated for eating disorders like anorexia nervosa or something like that.
Yeah.
And I said, I can't supervise you because I'm an adult shrink, but I could give you a couple of tips on how to get someone to talk to you who refuses to talk to you. And I'll show you what it is, and then Jill can break it down and tell you what I just did. But the resident might go in, and you're supposed to sit down for your hour with this teenager who refuses to talk. And just ahead of time, the technique involves not getting the teenager to talk, but guessing, using multiple choice empathy, why the teenager doesn't want to talk to you, and also using multiple choice disarming, or kind of where you point the blame at yourself rather than at the teenager. So it would go something like this. Well, gee, Alicia, I'm noticing that you don't want to talk to me today. And you absolutely don't have to. That's okay. But maybe you could just help me with one thing here. I'm trying to understand why it is that you don't want to talk to me. And I'm thinking about a lot of different ideas in my mind about why that might be. And maybe I can bounce a few of them off of you, and you can tell me just if any of them make sense to you. But one of them, and this is upsetting to me, is that I'm afraid that maybe I haven't been a good listener, and that's why you don't want to talk to me. Because, you know, what I've noticed here on the unit is that when you try to talk, your parents talk over you, and the nurses talk over you, and people are telling you what to do, like they're trying to coerce you into eat, and people aren't hearing how you think and feel. And when that happens to me, it really pisses me off when people won't listen to me. Then I don't want to talk to them either. And I feel like probably I haven't been a good listener, you know, when I've been with you. I've probably been doing that same thing to you. So that's my first idea. And if that's going on, I would understand that you'd be feeling kind of not trusting me and angry with me and kind of hurt and lonely and anxious and just pissed off. And then another theory would be that you're just, you know, angry with me about something. And I know sometimes when I'm angry with someone, I don't want to talk to them. You know, I just kind of want to freeze them out. And that could very well be because I'm pretty aggressive and people get angry at me a lot. And, it's always shocking to me when I find out that I've hurt someone's feelings. And then maybe there's something you're ashamed about, like, you're using drugs, or you want to use drugs, or you want to binge and eat a bunch of sweet stuff or whatever, or you're hiding stuff or whatever, or maybe some sexual fantasies or activities that you're ashamed of and don't want to talk about. And I'm wondering, it could be something else too. Does any of that ring a bell? Does any of that make sense? And then the residents told me and then you add some stroking. I really like you, and I'd love to hear if I've got it right. And then generally the person will nod. They say, yeah, that does make sense, and say which theory makes sense. And then they say the teenager opens right up and talks, and they have a great session. Can you summarize what I did there, Jill?
Yeah, I think you did a good job actually before doing it of introducing it. I think you said that you used kind of multiple choice, disarming, and empathy. And so what does that mean? We can't, it's not true disarming because the person hasn't said anything that you're disarming. It's sort of theoretical disarming. Yeah. I wonder if this might be going on, and if so, but you do a good job. That would totally make sense to me. I would understand that. I might even feel that way too. And so you lay out, we say multiple choice because you lay out like 3 different possibilities along with feeling empathy with each of those, and if that were the case, you might be feeling kind of angry with me or hurt or lonely or ashamed, whatever the feelings were. So I think it was a combination of kind of the disarming and the feeling empathy laid out for a couple options. And then you ended with some stroking is what you said, right? Some nice authentic stroking and kind of inquiry, right? If I'd be interested if any of these do ring a bell or make sense, or this is what's going on, or if there's something else I haven't even thought of.
Yeah, but notice that one thing I'm not doing is asking the person to talk to me.
Right.
To open up, and that's the mistake. Therapists will say, well, how can I help you if you won't talk to me?
Yes, exactly, which is kind of persuasive and coercive. And
shuts the person down. And then when the person does talk to you, you have to reinforce them right away and stroke them, rather than getting defensive or arguing or shutting them down again. Yeah. So anyway, that's the method there. We had one last quickie here.
And David, I was just going to say to the person who asked you, though, how do I share criticisms with others? I did just want to mention we did that one probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, because it was before the sort of flirting and hustling. So if this person who asked that question, just go ahead and look at David's Facebook page or the Feeling Good Institute Facebook page and look at the past presentations that we did. But we did talk quite a bit about that.
Yeah. It should be 3 back from now, but you can see them all on my public Facebook page, and you'll see one with David and Jill about 3 weeks ago. It's Intimacy Part 2, and that was on that exact thing. Yeah. Well, I have a couple quick announcements before we close off here. We'll skip the one on depression. I'll put that on.
Sure, we can do that in the future, Yeah.
And are we going to do next week?
I think so. I can't remember. Yeah. Are you traveling? Is that...
No, I'll be back. So I think it's David and Jill show again next week. So we'll think of some stuff and email me if you have topics you want. But I wanted to mention 2 things, and then you have an announcement. Day after tomorrow. See, this is Sunday, July 1st. So on July 3rd starts my Whistler 4-day intensive. So if you're in Canada and you want to scoot over to Whistler, there's still some open slots there. And they call this phone number if you're interested in that 4-day intensive, which starts July 3rd, 2018, starts on Tuesday. And it's 1-800-456-5424. That's 1-800-456-5424. And then my second announcement is that on August 6th to 9th, it's going to be the awesome, well, Lisa told me not to call it awesome. I'm supposed to tone down. I come on too strong sometimes, and she's right about that.
It's going to be a very mediocre workshop, right?
Yeah, my very average annual 4-day intensive at the South San Francisco Conference Center, and Jill and I are going to do a live demonstration there, which has been easily average in the last 3 or 4 years. We've seen some arguably amazing changes in people. That's usually the best workshop of the year. And contact iahb.org, iahb.org, or call 800-258-8411. That's 800-258-8411 for information about that one. And would love to see some of you August 6th to 9th at the San Francisco Intensive. We're returning to the beautiful South San Francisco Conference Center, and it's usually just a tremendous event. And then you said that Daniel Minty is going to start an online.
Yeah. So I'll just say, at Feeling Good Institute, we often offer online trainings for therapists who want to learn and master Team CBT. And so we have a group, a 6-week, every other Friday from 12 to 1:45 course that's beginning on Friday, July 6th. So it's taught by a wonderful team trainer, Daniel Minty. He's really a joy to work with and learn from. So you can check out the online offerings. It's feelinggoodinstitute.com/training.
Right. And then Lisa, our wonderful Lisa Kelly, who I have to give a shout out and thank Lisa for her wonderful support for all of us and technical help in promotion.
Promotional training and...
She says, please leave your positive and negative feedback for our broadcast here. I don't know where here is, but maybe
in the chat box, in the comment box, now, later, just to let David and I and Lisa know what you like about the broadcast, what we can improve.
I got it. Or in an email to david@feelinggood.com. Please rate the broadcast to a scale from 0 to 10, with 10 being the absolute best. And then tell us what you don't like, what you do like, and more important, tell us what. And also tell us if you're a therapist or a general public, because we don't even know who you are. And the more you tell us and guide us, the more we'll be able to kind of meet your needs. And please like us. I think you're supposed to click likes. Tell your friends if there's some way of doing that so we can kind of
if you think it was useful, go ahead and share this broadcast, right? You can share it with others.
Yeah. And so I think we'll end right on time today. Let me again just thank you, Jill. And if you have any patients who need treatment, send them to Jill and the Feeling Good Institute. If you're looking for some of the very best therapy, in my opinion, available, how would they do that if they want to refer someone to you or the Feeling Good Institute?
They can email me. It's Jill Levitt, my first and last name, Jill Levitt @feelinggoodinstitute.com. Or again, you can check on the if you go to feelinggoodinstitute.com page, you can find treatment and training.
And thank you, Bernie. We'll end up with your comment. Great teaching today. Thanks much. Learning deeper. Thank you for joining us. Your support and sense of humor and joyous friendship means a great deal, Bernie, and all of you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.